It started with a quiet remark that was never meant to leave royal circles. A comment overheard after a private engagement. A conversation that quickly sparked questions across palace corridors. Then came a revelation from Duchess Sophie herself, one that suggested Prince Edward had once been considered for responsibilities many believed would forever remain tied to Princess Anne. Suddenly, an old royal assumption was no longer certain. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For years, certain responsibilities within the monarchy seemed almost inseparable from the people who carried them. Some royal roles become so closely connected to an individual that the public eventually stops imagining anyone else performing them. Princess Anne built precisely that kind of reputation. Through decades of relentless service, unwavering discipline, and an extraordinary commitment to duty, she became one of the institution's most dependable figures. Her workload was legendary. Her dedication was rarely questioned. Her place within the royal structure appeared permanent. That is why reports suggesting Prince Edward had once been considered for responsibilities associated with Anne immediately captured attention. The story reportedly began with comments linked to discussions about royal patronages and the long-term future of certain responsibilities. While details remained unclear, the suggestion alone was enough to spark intense curiosity. Royal observers understood that patronages are far more than ceremonial titles. They represent relationships built over years, sometimes decades. They connect senior royals with charities, organizations, military units, and causes that often become central to their public identity. Any conversation involving the future of those responsibilities naturally carries significant weight. What made the reports especially intriguing was the involvement of Prince Edward. For much of his royal career, Edward has operated quietly compared to some of his more prominent relatives. He rarely dominates headlines. He seldom attracts controversy. Yet within royal circles, his reputation has reportedly grown steadily over the years. Consistency, reliability, and discretion became qualities frequently associated with his work. While public attention often focused elsewhere, Edward continued building a record of service that earned respect among many observers. As speculations surrounding Sophie's remarks spread, attention quickly shifted toward the possibility that senior members of the family may have quietly discussed how royal duties would be managed in the years ahead. Such conversations would hardly be surprising. Every institution plans for the future, and the monarchy is no exception. Responsibilities evolve. Circumstances change. New challenges emerge. Yet the notion that roles connected to Princess Anne might even be part of those discussions challenging. Assumptions that many had considered untouchable. The public reaction reflected that surprise. For generations, Anne had come to symbolize duty in its purest form. She represented consistency during periods of change and uncertainty. Her reputation was built not through publicity but through relentless work. As a result, the idea that anyone else could potentially inherit aspects of her portfolio generated immediate debate. Was it simply a matter of practical planning? Was it recognition of Edward's growing responsibilities? Or did it reveal a broader strategy regarding the future structure of the monarchy? Questions multiplied with remarkable speed. Royal commentators revisited Edward's expanding role in recent years. Supporters pointed to his increasing visibility and the trust seemingly placed in him. Others argued that Anne's unique standing within the institution could never truly be replicated. The discussion soon became less about specific patronages and more about how responsibilities are allocated behind palace walls. That debate exposed a fascinating reality about modern royal life. Much of what the public sees is carefully organized, yet much of what determines those arrangements remains hidden from view. Decisions involving duties, patronages, and future planning are rarely explained in detail. As a result, even the smallest revelation can generate significant speculation. The absence of complete information encourages people to search for meaning between the lines. Meanwhile, the possibility that such discussions may have occurred behind closed doors added another layer of intrigue. If senior royals had indeed evaluated future patronage structures, what factors influenced those conversations? Experience? Availability? Public perception? Long-term planning? No definitive answers emerged, but the questions themselves proved compelling enough to keep the story alive. What began as a quiet remark had evolved into a wider conversation about succession regarding responsibility and the unseen mechanisms that help shape the monarchy's future. The more people discussed it, the more fascinating the mystery became, because beneath the speculation lay a deeper question about how the institution prepares for the years ahead and who will ultimately carry its most important responsibilities forward. But if Edward was truly considered for roles once associated with Anne, the next question was impossible to ignore: who first proposed the idea and why? Behind the public ceremonies and carefully choreographed appearances, influential figures were reportedly discussing the future of royal representation. What appeared settled from the outside may have been far more complicated within palace walls. As questions surrounding Prince Edward's potential connection to major patronages continued to spread, attention shifted toward a subject the public rarely sees discussed openly: the challenge of managing royal responsibilities in a changing era. For decades, the monarchy operated with a larger pool of working royals capable of representing the institution across hundreds of engagements each year. But circumstances evolve, generations change, expectations shift, and according to reports circulating among royal observers, senior figures may have been quietly considering how those responsibilities would be distributed in the future. At the heart of those discussions was a growing concern about balance. The monarchy's public role demands extraordinary commitment. Patronages require attention. Charitable organizations expect support. Official visits, ceremonies, and community engagements fill calendars year after year. While the public often focuses on the most visible members of the family, much of the institution's success depends upon the ability to distribute those obligations effectively. Reports suggested that advisors had been evaluating how best to ensure that important responsibilities remained properly supported in the years ahead. That point, stability immediately intensified interest in Edward's role. For much of his life, he occupied a unique position within the royal family. Never the heir, rarely the headline figure, often working quietly while attention focused elsewhere. Yet over time, that very consistency became one of his greatest strengths. As controversies emerged around other figures and public attention shifted between different royal narratives, Edward developed a reputation for dependability. He appeared where he was expected to appear. He fulfilled responsibilities without drama. He maintained a steady presence that increasingly attracted respect. It was this reputation, according to some observers, that may have contributed to discussions regarding future patronage structures. Not because anyone was seeking to erase established legacies, but because institutions constantly evaluate how best to manage their responsibilities. Reports suggested that conversations may have centered on modernization rather than replacement. That distinction mattered enormously. The idea was not necessarily about taking something away from one royal and handing it to another. Instead, it was reportedly about preparing for future demands and ensuring continuity. Even so, the suggestion generated unexpected tension among royal watchers. For many people, patronages become deeply connected to the individuals who represent them. Over time, those relationships acquire emotional significance. They tell stories of dedication, commitment, and years of service. As a result, discussions about future allocations often provoke strong reactions. Some observers viewed the reported evaluations as practical and responsible planning. Others worried that even discussing such changes risked diminishing the contributions of figures who had spent decades building those connections. That tension became particularly noticeable when comparisons emerged between Anne's extraordinary workload and Edward's expanding responsibilities. Anne's reputation for tireless service had become almost legendary. Year after year, she maintained one of the busiest schedules within the family. Her commitment appeared unwavering regardless of circumstance. Yet the very scale of that workload inevitably led some commentators to wonder how future generations might manage similar demands. At the same time, Edward's profile was gradually evolving. Increased responsibilities brought increased visibility. His work attracted greater attention. Organizations connected to his patronages frequently praised his involvement and commitment. While he remained far removed from the intense spotlight that followed some relatives, his growing role became increasingly difficult to overlook. The more people discussed these possibilities, the more fascinating the story became. What initially appeared to be a simple question about patronages was revealing something larger about the monarchy itself. Behind every ceremonial appearance and public engagement exists a complex network of planning, evaluation, and preparation. The institution must constantly look ahead, anticipating challenges before they arrive. Those responsibilities often require conversations that remain hidden from public view. Yet those same conversations can generate powerful speculation when fragments of information begin to emerge. Suddenly, observers found themselves debating not only Edward's suitability but the future direction of royal representation itself. The discussion was no longer confined to individual patronages. It had expanded into a broader examination of duty, succession, and continuity. And as that examination deepened, another reality became impossible to ignore. Every conversation about the future eventually returned to the same question. Not who might inherit responsibilities, but who had spent decades defining them in the first place. Because the more officials reportedly examined Edward's suitability, the more attention inevitably shifted toward the remarkable legacy that had made those patronages so significant. Yet the more officials examined Edward's suitability, the more attention turned toward the royal whose legacy these patronages had come to symbolize. For decades, Princess Anne built a reputation that few members of the royal family could match. Tireless, disciplined, relentlessly committed. Her patronages became more than titles, they became extensions of her identity. That reality was impossible to separate from the growing discussion surrounding Prince Edward and the future of certain royal responsibilities. The deeper observers examined the reports, the more they found themselves returning to the same conclusion. Any conversation involving patronages connected to Anne was never going to be simple. It was never going to be viewed as routine administrative planning. Because over the course of her remarkable royal career, Anne had transformed those responsibilities into something far greater than ceremonial obligation. She had woven them into the very fabric of her public identity. For generations, Anne became synonymous with duty. While others often attracted headlines through controversy, popularity, or public fascination, she earned respect through something far less dramatic but arguably more enduring: consistency. Year after year, she carried out engagements with little interest in publicity and even less interest in praise. Her reputation was not built through carefully crafted narratives. It was built through thousands of appearances, countless meetings, and decades of unwavering commitment. That dedication created a bond between Anne and the organizations she represented that few royals have ever achieved. Over time, her patronages stopped feeling like assignments and started feeling like personal missions. Charitable organizations frequently associated her name with reliability and genuine involvement. Many supporters admired the fact that she appeared to approach those responsibilities not as obligations imposed by royal status but as causes worthy of sustained attention. This distinction mattered enormously. People did not simply view Anne as the holder of patronages. They viewed her as a guardian of them. That perception became so deeply ingrained that many members of the public eventually assumed her roles were virtually untouchable. The idea that they could one day be transferred, redistributed, or even reconsidered seemed almost unimaginable. In the minds of many royal observers, Anne's connection to those responsibilities had become permanent. Her legacy and her patronages appeared inseparable. Yet institutions are always forced to confront the future, no matter how established the present may seem. That is what made the reports surrounding Edward so fascinating. They did not challenge Anne's accomplishments. If anything, they highlighted the extraordinary standard she had created. Because once discussions began about who might eventually assume greater responsibility, abilities, an unavoidable question emerged. Could anyone realistically follow her example? It was a daunting prospect. Anne's workload, commitment, and experience were the result of decades of service. Those qualities could not simply be replicated overnight. They were earned through years of dedication and sacrifice. For many commentators, this was precisely why the reported conversations generated such strong reactions. People were not merely evaluating Edward. They were comparing him, however indirectly, to one of the most respected working royals of the modern era. To Edward's supporters, however, that comparison was not entirely unreasonable. They pointed to his own record of service, his steady expansion of responsibilities, and his reputation for reliability. Unlike many public figures, Edward rarely found himself at the center of controversy. He maintained a measured approach to royal life and gradually earned trust through consistency rather than spectacle. While few would argue that he had matched Anne's decades of achievement, some believed he possessed qualities that made him a credible candidate for a larger role. Still, the challenge remained immense. Every discussion about Edward seemed to circle back to Anne's legacy. Every question about future patronages inevitably became a reflection on the standards she had established. Her influence remained so strong that even hypothetical conversations about succession appeared overshadowed by her presence. Perhaps that was the most revealing aspect of the entire story. The debate was never truly about replacing Anne. It was about recognizing how difficult it would be for anyone to follow in her footsteps. Her legacy had become the benchmark against which future possibilities would be measured. And that was precisely the challenge facing those who believed Edward might eventually inherit a larger royal portfolio. For years, Prince Edward operated away from the intense spotlight surrounding other senior royals. But quietly, steadily, his position within the institution was changing. That transformation did not happen through dramatic announcements or headline-grabbing moments. In fact, one of the most remarkable aspects of Edward's rise was how little attention it initially received. While public fascination often focused on family disputes, constitutional questions, and high-profile royal figures, Edward continued moving forward with a consistency that many observers believe became one of his greatest strengths. The very qualities that once kept him away from the center of public conversation were now becoming reasons why palace insiders reportedly viewed him differently. As discussions about future responsibilities intensified, people began looking more closely at the path Edward had followed over recent years. The pattern was difficult to ignore. His appearances at major royal engagements gradually increased. His visibility during important national events became more noticeable. Responsibility. Abilities that might once have been handled by a wider group of working royals increasingly appeared concentrated among a smaller number of trusted figures. Within that changing environment, Edward's role seemed to expand naturally rather than suddenly. What made this evolution particularly fascinating was the contrast between public perception and institutional reality. For many years, Edward remained one of the least discussed senior royals. He rarely generated controversy. He seldom dominated headlines. Yet inside the framework of the monarchy, those very characteristics may have enhanced his value. Reliability is often less visible than drama, but institutions built upon continuity frequently depend on it far more. Reports suggest that Edward's growing involvement with charitable organizations played a significant role in strengthening his reputation. Over time, he developed relationships with numerous causes and community groups that appreciated not only his presence but also his onset. Unlike short bursts of attention that come and go, long-term commitment creates trust. Many observers noted that Edward appeared increasingly comfortable within these responsibilities, building connections that reflected a steady and professional approach to royal service. As his profile expanded, so too did recognition of the work he had been carrying out for years. Commentators who once paid little attention to his activities began highlighting his record of service. Public discussions increasingly described him as dependable, experienced, and committed. These qualities may not always generate sensational headlines, but within an institution facing significant challenges and transitions, they can become exceptionally valuable. The timing of this shift also added to its significance. The monarchy had entered a period marked by change, uncertainty, and heightened scrutiny. Public expectations continued evolving. The number of active working royals had become a frequent subject of discussion. Questions about workload distribution appeared with increasing regularity. Against that backdrop, figures capable of assuming greater responsibilities naturally attracted attention. According to some reports, palace figures were particularly impressed by Edward's professionalism and willingness to undertake responsibilities without seeking publicity. Whether those reports fully reflected internal thinking remained impossible to verify. Yet the persistence of such claims suggested that his reputation within royal circles had strengthened considerably. Observers increasingly viewed him as someone capable of supporting the institution during a period of transition. That perception inevitably fueled speculation about the future. If Edward's responsibilities continued expanding, what might that mean for the years ahead? Could his growing role signal broader changes within the monarchy's structure? Was his increased visibility simply the result of practical necessity, or what? As it part of a larger long-term strategy? These questions became increasingly common as discussions surrounding patronages and future duties continued. What made the speculation so compelling was that it seemed connected to a much larger story unfolding within the royal family. The institution was adapting to new realities while attempting to preserve traditions that defined its identity. Every adjustment appeared small when viewed in isolation, yet when considered together, those adjustments began to paint a picture of gradual transformation. Edward's rise was not being portrayed as a challenge to anyone else's legacy. Instead, it was increasingly viewed as evidence that the monarchy was preparing for the future in ways the public rarely sees. Quiet decisions, incremental changes, expanded responsibilities, all occurring beneath the surface while public attention remained focused elsewhere. And as more people began noticing those developments, the conversation shifted once again. The question was no longer whether Edward's position had grown. The question was how far that growth might eventually go. As Edward's reputation rose, insiders began asking whether the monarchy was preparing for a larger transition than anyone realized. Sometimes a single comment can reignite years of speculation. According to royal watchers, Sophie's acknowledgement did exactly that, transforming quiet rumors into a subject of national fascination. What had once been little more than occasional palace gossip suddenly became a story that seemed impossible to ignore. For years, discussions about royal patronages, future responsibilities, and succession planning had largely remained confined to royal analysts and devoted observers. These conversations surfaced from time to time, generated brief interest, and then faded back into the background. But this time was different. Sophie's reported acknowledgement appeared to give new life to questions that many believed had already been settled. Suddenly, people were not merely discussing Prince Edward's growing role. They were re-examining years of assumptions about how the monarchy prepares for the future. The reaction was immediate. Media outlets began revisiting earlier reports that had previously received limited attention. Archived interviews, past royal engagements, and long-forgotten commentary were suddenly viewed through a completely different lens. Analysts searched for clues hidden within previous developments. Moments that once seemed ordinary were now being reinterpreted as potential indicators of a broader strategy. The narrative expanded rapidly, fueled by a growing sense that there might be more to the story than anyone initially realized. What fascinated observers most was not necessarily the possibility that Edward had been considered for additional responsibilities. It was the implication that conversations about succession within patronages may have been occurring long before the public became aware of them. That possibility introduced an entirely new dimension to the discussion. If such evaluations had indeed taken place, how extensive were they? Who participated in them? And what other future plans might have been quietly examined behind palace walls? Royal analysts quickly found themselves divided. Some argued that the reports reflected nothing more than responsible institutional planning. Every major organization prepares for future leadership transitions, and the monarchy would be no different. Others believed the significance extended much further. They suggested that the revelation offered a rare glimpse into how the institution adapts to changing circumstances while attempting to preserve stability. Regardless of which interpretation proved correct, one thing was undeniable. Public interest had surged dramatically. The debate surrounding patronage succession soon became one of the most discussed royal topics in months. Commentators examined Edward's increasing visibility. They reflected on Anne's extraordinary legacy. They analyzed the evolving roles of working royals and considered how responsibilities might be distributed in the decades ahead. What began as a conversation about specific patronages gradually evolved into something much broader. People were no longer focused solely on individual positions. They were examining the structure of the monarchy itself. At the heart of this fascination was a simple but powerful question. How does an institution built upon tradition prepare for inevitable change? The monarchy derives much of its strength from continuity. Its rituals, customs, and long-standing relationships provide a sense of permanence that has endured through generations. Yet even the most established traditions must adapt over time. New challenges emerge. Expectations evolve, responsibilities shift. The balancing act between preservation and adaptation has always been one of the monarchy's greatest tests. As discussions intensified, attention increased. Glide shifted away from the personalities involved and toward the broader implications of the story. The public wanted to understand what these reported conversations revealed about the future. Was the monarchy quietly preparing for significant transitions? Were senior figures evaluating how best to manage responsibilities in an era of increasing scrutiny? Or was the entire controversy simply the result of routine planning magnified by public curiosity? The more observers searched for answers, the more they found themselves confronting larger questions about leadership, continuity, and succession. Every new theory seemed to point toward the same conclusion. This story had expanded beyond the boundaries of patronages and personalities. It had become a reflection of an institution navigating one of the most important periods in its modern history. Perhaps that explains why the fascination endured. People sensed that beneath the surface of the discussion lay something far more significant than a simple redistribution of responsibilities. They sensed a story about preparation, adaptation, and the future of the crown itself. And once that realization took hold, there was no turning back. But the deeper observers looked, the clearer it became that this story was never only about Edward or Anne, it was about the future direction of the crown itself. Every monarchy faces the same dilemma: preserve tradition or adapt for survival. Within royal circles, that debate may have shaped every conversation surrounding these patronages. As the discussion surrounding Prince Edward and Princess Anne continued to gain momentum, it gradually revealed a deeper struggle unfolding beneath the surface. What initially appeared to be a question about individual responsibilities was increasingly being interpreted as part of a much larger debate about the future of the monarchy itself. Behind palace walls, according to royal observers, competing philosophies may have been shaping conversations about how the institution should evolve in an era unlike any it had faced before. On one side stood those often described as traditionalists. These voices believed that the monarchy's greatest strength has always been its consistency. For generations, royal roles have carried meaning because they endure. Patronages become powerful precisely because they are associated with individuals who devote years, sometimes decades, to supporting them. From this perspective, continuity is not merely desirable, it is essential. Every long-standing relationship between a royal figure and an organization helps reinforce the stability that the institution seeks to project. Changing those arrangements too quickly risks weakening the very traditions that have allowed the monarchy to survive for centuries. Yet another perspective was reportedly emerging alongside that view. Reform-minded advisors and observers increasingly focused on practical realities. The modern monarchy operates in an environment of intense scrutiny, expanding responsibilities, and evolving public expectations. The number of working royals has changed. Demands have increased. Public engagement now requires greater flexibility than ever before. Those who favored adaptation argued that preserving the institution sometimes requires thoughtful adjustments rather than rigid adherence to historical patterns. This tension created a fascinating dilemma. Both sides claimed to be protecting the monarchy. Both believed they were acting in its best interests. Yet their visions for achieving that goal differed significantly. Traditionalists emphasized symbolism, continuity, and legacy. Reformers emphasized sustainability, efficiency, and preparation for the future. The debate was not necessarily about choosing one path over the other. It was about determining how to balance both priorities in an increasingly complex environment. Patronages became a perfect example of this challenge. Once viewed primarily as honorary roles, they were now being examined through a far more modern lens. Questions emerged about workload management, long-term planning, and institutional resilience. How should responsibilities be distributed among working royals? How could organizations continue receiving effective support while adapting to changing circumstances? These were not simple questions, and they did not lend themselves to simple answers. At the center of that debate stood Prince Edward. Whether intentionally or not, he had become a symbol of competing visions for the monarchy's future. To some observers, his growing role represented sensible preparation. His reliability, professionalism, and expanding experience appeared to make him a logical candidate for greater responsibilities. To others, The discussion raised concerns about preserving established traditions and honoring the extraordinary legacies already associated with certain patronages. The symbolism surrounding Anne's contributions only intensified the debate. Her decades of service had transformed many responsibilities into powerful representations of commitment and continuity. Any suggestion that those responsibilities might eventually evolve inevitably sparked emotional reactions. People were not simply discussing organizational structures. They were discussing legacies built over lifetimes. Meanwhile, practical considerations refused to disappear. Workloads remained substantial. Public expectations continued growing. The monarchy faced the difficult task of maintaining tradition while ensuring that future generations could effectively carry forward its responsibilities. This balancing act increasingly appeared to define the institution's modern challenge. As reports and speculation continued to circulate, it became clear that the debate extended far beyond individual personalities. It touched on fundamental questions about how the monarchy should function in the decades ahead. Should symbolism always take precedence over practicality? Should historical associations remain untouched regardless of circumstance? Or should the institution adapt when necessary to ensure long-term stability? The answers remained uncertain, but the discussion itself revealed how significant the issue had become. What started as a conversation about patronages had evolved into a reflection on the monarchy's future identity. Every argument, every theory, and every interpretation seemed connected to the same underlying question. How does an ancient institution prepare for a changing world without losing the qualities that define it? And while advisors argued over strategy, the public was beginning to form opinions of its own. Once whispers reached the public sphere, reactions arrived swiftly. Supporters praised Edward's dedication, while others questioned whether any transition involving Anne's legacy could ever be accepted without controversy. The response was immediate, emotional, and deeply divided. What had begun as a discussion confined largely wide royal observers suddenly became a topic that captivated a much wider audience. The moment reports regarding Prince Edward's potential connection to future patronages entered public conversation, people began choosing sides. Not because they opposed one royal or supported another, but because the story touched upon something much larger than individual personalities. It touched upon questions of loyalty, legacy, and the future identity of the monarchy itself. For many supporters of Edward, the reports felt like overdue recognition of a royal figure who had spent years earning respect through dedication rather than publicity. They pointed to his long record of service, his steady presence during challenging periods, and his willingness to undertake responsibilities without seeking attention. In their view, Edward represented exactly the kind of figure the monarchy needed moving forward. Reliable, professional, consistent. The qualities that once kept him away from headlines were now being celebrated as strengths. To these supporters, discussions about expanded responsibilities seemed entirely reasonable. Yet there was another side to the debate, and it was equally passionate. Admirers of Princess Anne viewed the situation through a very different lens. To them, Anne's contribution to royal life stood in a category of its own. Her decades of tireless service had created a legacy that few could rival. The organizations associated with her name were not simply patronages. They were the result of years of commitment, personal involvement, and unwavering dedication. Many questioned whether any future transition involving those responsibilities could occur without provoking strong emotions. They were not necessarily criticizing Edward. Instead, they were defending the remarkable standards Anne had established. That tension created the perfect conditions for a public debate that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. Media coverage amplified every development. Lines revisited earlier reports. Commentators offered competing theories. Some framed the story as evidence of thoughtful succession planning. Others portrayed it as a reflection of broader changes occurring within the institution. Every new interpretation seemed to inspire another round of discussion. Royal analysts quickly became central figures in the conversation. Their opinions varied dramatically. Some argued that the monarchy had no choice but to prepare for future transitions. Others emphasized the importance of preserving traditions and honoring established legacies. Still others suggested that both perspectives could be true at the same time. The institution, they argued, must balance continuity with practicality. Yet even among experts, consensus proved elusive. As the debate intensified, pressure mounted for greater clarity. Many observers wanted answers. Were the reports accurate? Had discussions actually taken place? If so, how serious had they been? The absence of definition of information only fueled further speculation. Every unanswered question created room for new theories. Every silence encouraged additional interpretation. The monarchy found itself confronting a familiar challenge. Public curiosity had expanded beyond the original story. People were no longer asking only about patronages. They were asking about the future. They wanted to understand how responsibilities would be managed in the years ahead. They wanted to know how the institution planned to adapt to changing circumstances while preserving the traditions that defined it. What made the situation particularly fascinating was that both sides of the debate ultimately shared a common concern. Whether supporting Edward or defending Anne's legacy, most participants wanted the same thing: a strong and stable monarchy capable of carrying its responsibilities into the future. Their disagreements centered not on the destination, but on the path required to reach it. As emotions settled and lines continued to circulate, one reality became increasingly clear. The story had grown far beyond any single revelation or rumored discussion. It had become a reflection of the hopes, concerns, and expectations people held for the monarchy's next chapter. Every opinion, every argument, and every theory pointed toward a larger uncertainty waiting just beyond the horizon. Yet amid the debate, one final question lingered above every headline, and it concerned what happens next. The monarchy has always evolved through moments that seemed insignificant at first. A conversation, a recommendation, a single acknowledgement. Then suddenly, history takes a different path. That may ultimately be the lasting lesson from the speculation surrounding Prince Edward, Princess Anne, and the future of royal patronages. What began as a quiet observation reportedly linked to comments from Sophie gradually transformed into a national conversation about responsibility, succession, and the future direction of the crown. Yet despite months of analysis, debates, and competing interpretations, many of the most important questions remain unanswered. And perhaps that uncertainty is precisely what makes the story so compelling. The House of Windsor has never been an institution that reveals every decision the moment it is made. Much of its evolution occurs gradually, often beyond public view. Significant changes rarely arrive with dramatic announcements at the beginning. Instead, they emerge through a series of small developments that only appear meaningful when viewed together. A new responsibility here, a growing role there, an unexpected comment that suddenly causes people to revisit assumptions they once considered permanent. By the time the wider public notices a shift, the foundations for that change may have been quietly taking shape for years. That possibility continues to fuel speculation regarding future patronage arrangements. Observers remain fascinated by the prospect that discussio NS may have occurred concerning how responsibilities could be managed in the decades ahead. Whether those conversations were extensive or merely exploratory remains impossible to know with certainty. Yet the fact that such questions continue to attract attention demonstrates how deeply invested people remain in the monarchy's future. At the center of that discussion stands Prince Edward, whose role appears likely to remain under close observation for years to come. His steady rise within the institution has become one of the most intriguing developments in modern royal life. What once appeared to be a relatively quiet royal career is now increasingly viewed through a different lens. Every new responsibility, every major engagement, and every indication of growing trust attracts renewed interest from commentators eager to understand what it might reveal about the future. Yet even as attention focuses on Edward, the influence of Princess Anne remains impossible to overlook. Her legacy company continues to shape every aspect of the conversation. Decades of service created a standard that few could hope to match. Her reputation for discipline, commitment, and unwavering dedication transformed her patronages into symbols of continuity. Any discussion regarding future responsibilities inevitably returns to the example she established. In many ways, Anne's legacy has become both the benchmark and the challenge facing those who may one day carry similar responsibilities. Meanwhile, Sophie's comments continue to linger over the entire story. They offered enough insight to reignite curiosity, yet not enough to provide definitive answers. As a result, they left behind a trail of unanswered questions that continued to inspire debate. What discussions truly occurred? How seriously were various possibilities considered? And what other conversations might be taking place beyond public view today? Reports suggesting that palace insiders are preparing for future transitions only add to the intrigue. Such preparation would hardly be surprising. Every enduring institution plans for change long before that change becomes visible. The monarchy has survived for centuries precisely because it understands the importance of balancing stability with adaptation. Yet knowing that preparations may be underway does little to resolve the uncertainty surrounding what form those preparations might ultimately take. That uncertainty reflects the larger challenge facing the modern monarchy. The balance between continuity and change remains unresolved. Tradition provides strength, adaptation provides survival. The institution must somehow embrace both at the same time. Every decision involving patronages, responsibilities, and succession exists within that delicate space between honoring the past and preparing for the future. Perhaps that is why stories like this resonate so deeply. They are never really about individual appointments or administrative decisions. They are about the evolution of an institution that continues to shape public imagination generation after generation. People recognize that today's speculation may become tomorrow's reality. They understand that seemingly minor developments can eventually alter the course of royal history. And so the questions remain. The debates continue. The speculation endures. Because somewhere behind the headlines, beyond the rumors, and beneath the public discussion lies the future shape of the monarchy itself, still forming, still evolving, and still waiting to reveal what comes next. Because in the House of Windsor, the most consequential decisions are rarely announced. When they begin, they start as whispers, grow into questions, and eventually become the stories that redefine the monarchy itself. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.